Hey, welcome to the show. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to talk about another video in this video. CryptoLewLew recorded an interview with Jake Claver the other day, and we're going to break down, I'm going to show you some clips from it and talk about kind of what I think this means and why some of the things they talked about is so important. We're going to talk about XRP, Polysign, what to do with our XRP once it increases in price very significantly, and how can we use that XRP as a way to make income. Hey, welcome to the show. Molly here. Today we're going to talk about XRP and what to do with our XRP once it increases dramatically in value. Before we get into that, I want to clarify a couple things. What I'm doing here is a scenario plan. If certain things happened, how would we deal with it? I have no idea if these things will happen. I'm not a psychic, I'm not a time traveler, though I would really much like to be. That'd be super cool to have that ability. That said, if this scenario were to play out, things that we have talked about in this channel before, and XRP Ledger were to become the dominant layer one, XRP would become an asset that is used to exchange value and store value, then I want to know, what should I do? Because one of the problems that could happen is we have a cynical view that this would never happen, and then one day we wake up and it has happened and we're like, oh, what do we do now? So maybe this is an unlikely chance that this will happen. I actually am pretty optimistic that it will happen. But regardless, this discussion today is to analyze CryptoLew's video with Jake Claver, a scenario they've laid out, some clarifications around Polysign, which I was very excited to hear, and like just getting the ball rolling around discussing how would we manage like this huge amount of money, because I've never done that before, and I don't want to wake up one day in a total like fear-driven panic that I have no idea what to do and act like a crazy person. So instead, it would be prudent to have a plan on paper so that should these conditions arise, we kind of know what to do. So just clarifying, I'm not saying these things will happen, but in the event that they do, which would be awesome, let's figure out what to do about it. Okay. First thing that I want to show you is a clip where they talk about Polysign and how we can actually custody our XRP with Polysign. There was some concern that you might need to be an institution like a bank or some kind of fund or a special purpose vehicle, an SPV, which I'm not. And so we'd have to sort of figure out, how do you become that? How do you do that? Which isn't necessarily an unsolvable problem. But Jake did clarify that he spoke with Polysign and that they will be offering custody to accredited investors. And right now, the threshold for that is, I think, around 1 million. There's some other ways you can meet that criteria through taking some tests and working in certain industries, but that's sort of a common way. There is even discussions about raising that to $10 million. But if our XRP were to go up dramatically in price, that would be a way for many people to become accredited investors. All right, so let me show you this clip and then I'll be back.
They do support XRP, and if you are accredited already, you can custody your assets with Polysign. Previous to that conversation, on their other literature and website, I looked up that they only wanted to deal with institutions or bodies that had $150 million of net worth or higher. And so I thought that we would have to pool our XRP together inside of an SPV or another fund, and then we could go direct with them in order to gain yield and deal out the distributions. So I was prepared for that, and that's kind of why I set up the things that I set up.
Yep.
But it seems that they are willing to, well, they're going to allow accredited investors to partner directly with them.
Alrighty, so now that we know we could custody with Polysign, should we make that choice, which again, I'm not telling you what to do. All I'm showing you in this video is a possible pathway that you may or may not want to take. So the next question that becomes is, all right, well, how is it that XRP would increase in value so much? And If you've watched any of my videos, you know I've been working as part of this team to build these valuation models that are essentially simulations to see what could happen to the price of XRP if certain conditions are met. It was a tremendous learning experience. It was bizarre, the reaction that we got, but I learned a whole ton. Um, Namely, there's a couple of different ways that this could play out, meaning what would actually make XRP go up dramatically in value. I'm just going to use the number $10,000 a token for a placeholder for this discussion, but I'm not saying that's what it would be. It could be dramatically higher, it could be lower. But there's a couple ways that this could play out. Number one is the banks could make the decision to revalue the asset at sort of a new baseline price. This is similar to when the price of gold was established at $35 an ounce in the 1940s. We've also seen that things like the Plaza Accord and the Swiss franc being revalued, like governments get together sometimes and they decide to do a set price. So that is one way that this could happen. The other thing that could happen is the buyback could force a price adjustment. Some of the heat about that particular initiative has come from people feeling like there's like a group of people who are allowed to participate in the buyback, and if you aren't somehow invited, then you don't get to do it, and you'll be like left out. That's first of all silly. Uh, and more importantly, like you might benefit dramatically from the buyback, even if you don't participate. Namely, if a bunch of people work out this deal with some kind of entity, whether it is a central bank or a treasury of a government, and they buy it back at a much higher price, that'll essentially raise the price for everybody. That'll be the new baseline price if it's done in the public realm, which is kind of one of the reasons there. Now, do I say that's going to happen? No. We did see with one of the models, Dr. Bacchus's model, that it's really risky for central banks and Ripple to have retail potentially dump on the market once sort of everything starts going for real. And so it would be cheaper for them, and in the interest of financial stability, to have people who potentially want to sell to just pay us a lot of money early on so that we don't mess with the stability of the financial system. So that is one way that the buyback actually makes a logical sense, and it is in the interest of all the entities in the financial system that will be using these assets to move value, to not have speculative retail investors in there, like potentially messing with things. Then the third scenario is that there is no intervention other than the natural market forces, and we see the impact of the virtuous cycle, which is competing dynamics between utility of the asset, which is what the sort of transaction uses, and the store of value. And the idea, I've done some videos on it and some threads, I'll put some in the description, but the idea is that once people start to see that the price goes up from utility and you have wealth to store, you're like, well, I could store it in something that's either losing value from inflation or flat, or I could pick this asset that is growing in value. Why not put my money there? And so people would pull XRP out of the circulating supply to park their wealth in it. And that would mean that the available supply for transactions gets smaller, which then drives the prices. So it creates this competing dynamic where the more people use it, the more they want to store value, then the more they want to use it, and the more they want to store value, and it drives the price up like a cyclone. So that's sort of a couple of ways that the price could go up dramatically. And should that happen, we will all have to make our own individual decisions about, do you want to sell? What do you sell it for? Do you want to keep it? And this, I've had hours and hours of discussions around this. I don't have the definitive answer. I was kind of getting worried for some reason that this Polysign idea that I'd heard a long time ago might not be on the table. And this video with Lewis and Jake was great because it confirmed to me that this is definitely still a possibility. And so there's another clip that I want to show you now where Jake talks about XRP being revalued as a tier one asset. If you're not familiar with what that means, is that is sort of banking jargon. And that when banks hold assets, or they have their people, plus depositors, creditors, hold assets for the purposes of collateralizing the loan, not all assets are created equal. And it may there was some press a couple years ago around gold being named a tier one asset, which means that gold is sort of the most desirable form of collateral. You kind of get the most like loan dollars for your collateral amounts. It's essentially considered as the best form of money. And in this clip I'm going to show you now, Jake talks about XRP being labeled as a tier one asset, and that he discussed that with Polysign.
So in the previous conversation, we had discussed XRP becoming a tier one asset inside the banking system, and so it's premium collateral. And in order to have derivatives, you have to post collateral. Currently, people use U.S. Treasuries for that, and they currently pay 4 and 5% on most U.S. Treasuries. So,
all right, so that was interesting. If XRP becomes a tier one asset and is used as collateral for the derivatives market, that is huge. And this has been a point of debate when we've talked about the collateralization models for XRP, and this belief that if money is going to be transacted, then you don't really need to have like a huge amount of XRP available. Well, one exception though is if all of these derivative products are issued and XRP is used as the collateral asset for those, that means that value has to be held somewhere for these other products to work. Let me just give you a little bit of sense. I pulled some stats on the derivatives market, and I think this was from the BIS, the derivatives market at the end of June was $632 trillion for 2022. And that's up from 598 trillion at the end of 2020. So let's just call it $600 trillion. That is a lot of money. And if the derivatives market were to be managed and run on the XRP ledger, and that value had to be held in an asset, that would be a massive, massive amount of value needing to be collateralized with XRP. So I think that's pretty cool. Other thing that we want to talk about is just sort of some basic math. He did mention that when collateral is used for a derivatives product, the yield is generally around 5%. So if you were to take your XRP, I have my little calculator here. So let's just say for argument's sake that you had 1,000 XRP, okay? And let's just say for argument's sake, I'm not saying this will happen, but just to show you how the math would work. So I have 1,000 XRP, and let's say we have this revaluation, whether it happens sort of forced by the financial system or if it's a result of the virtuous cycle, and the value goes up to 10,000. That means that you now have $10 million worth of value. And if you were to get 5% yield, it means you make $500,000 a year in yield. Now, I don't know what the value of a dollar will be in a couple of years, so I'm talking about this in dollar terms, but it's very likely we may start to think in XRP and think in some other currency by then. So we'll see. And if you had more than 1,000 XRP, you can make some serious money with this. So the other thing that he's going to talk about that I'm going to just tell you in the description some of the timestamps for it, but he talks about this whole model of using your XRP as collateral to take out loans. This is, I know a lot of entrepreneurs that I know do this a lot. They will take out a loan at a low interest rate. They will use that money to go buy another asset that will make a higher interest rate, and you sort of net profit. I think Jake would be a great resource to learn from on this. I'll put his Twitter in the description. It's a little riskier because you have to know how to deploy that income, that money, those resources. And if you're going to go and buy property or buy another business or use it on some sort of investment that will generate a return, that can be a very smart and savvy way to do it, because you would get essentially what we're going to call inexpensive money that you go and deploy and you make more money. And so you sort of net profit. I'm not going to recommend doing that to anybody unless you are skilled and savvy and know kind of how to deploy that. But what I actually was just very optimistic about this video was that even if you didn't want to take that more active approach, if we were able to custody with Polysign and get the 5%, 5% of $10 million is still a nice chunk of change. And if you had, a couple multiples of that, that would be, I would do pretty well with that. So I just wanted to kind of talk about this one scenario that I was very delighted to hear about Lewis and Jake talk about in their video. I was delighted to hear that we don't have to be an institution to custody with Polysign, and that even if the accredited investor threshold were to be raised, it is still very possible that our XRP, should a major revaluation occur, whether it's a result of some kind of specific action or market forces. This could be a pretty neat scenario. Now, I'm not saying this will happen. I'm not trying to give you false hope. If anything, I am trying to give you something to think about. So, should these conditions be met, you've kind of had this conversation in your mind or with other people before you're in this sort of like panic type situation or fearful. I mean, this kind of happens, I think, with people who win the lottery. They kind of all of a sudden have all this money. Sometimes they refer to this as sudden wealth syndrome. And there's sort of this like, oh, I don't know what to do. And people end up buying a bunch of dumb things. They give the money away. They don't have a strategic plan on how to manage this money in a very thoughtful, smart way that preserves the wealth, generates some income, kind of, changes the lives of your family and your descendants for generations to come. So we may have that opportunity, and that's super cool. So I don't want to blow it, and I don't want any of you to blow it by not having had the foresight to think about a plan in advance. So this is one option. Selling your XRP could be another option, but then if you want to do that, which you totally could, think for yourself, what would I do with those resources? How would I invest them? How could I protect that, base capital and have some kind of interest as a result? You could do this sort of collateral loan thing as well. Just make sure you don't just go and spend all the money on stuff, because you will have to pay those loans back at some point. So anyway, just wanted to talk about this Polysign thing. I will see if you like this video, please hit like, helps me out with YouTube, and I'll see you in the next one.